The dying Apache chief had crawled 3 miles through the desert to reach Jake Morrison's water barrel. His final breath was seconds away when Jake made a choice that seemed simple: share his last drops of water with a stranger who was supposed to be his mortal enemy. But Jake didn't know this wasn't just any Apache warrior. This was Chief Takota, keeper of ancient tribal secrets, and his death would trigger the largest Apache war council in 50 years. By dawn, 100 warriors would kneel at Jake's door, and the fate of the entire American frontier would hang on the kindness of one broken-down cowboy who thought he was just helping a thirsty old man. The drought had been merciless that summer of 1876. 3 months without rain had turned the Arizona Territory into a furnace that killed cattle, dried up wells, and drove desperate men to murder over a single canteen of water. Jake's own supply was down to less than 2 gallons, barely enough to keep him alive until he could reach the next settlement. Still 3 days' hard ride through country that had claimed the lives of stronger men than him. But the figure he saw collapsed beside his water barrel wasn't some ordinary traveler. Even from 50 yards away, Jake could tell this was someone important. The eagle feathers woven into silver-streaked hair, the intricate beadwork on clothing that had once been magnificent, the way the man carried himself even while dying. This was Apache nobility. Jake's hand moved instinctively to his rifle. Every settler in the territory knew the stories. Apache raids that left entire families butchered, homesteads burned to ash, children taken in the night never to be seen again. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to put a bullet in the old chief's head and ride away fast. But as Jake approached, something stopped him cold. The old man's lips were moving, and the sound that came out wasn't war cries or curses. It was a song, soft and haunting, the kind of melody a grandfather might sing to calm a frightened child. And in his weathered hands, pressed against his chest like a treasure, was a small photograph of a white family, a woman and 2 young children, all smiling. "Water," the chief whispered in English, his voice like wind through dry leaves. "Please, for them." He held up the photograph with trembling fingers, and Jake saw something written on the back in careful schoolteacher handwriting. "To Chief Takota, who saved our lives. Forever grateful, the Henderson family." Jake stared at the photograph, his mind racing. The Hendersons, he'd heard that name before. A family that had been ambushed by renegade Apaches 2 years back, their wagon train attacked in the desert. Everyone said they'd been killed, scalped, left for the buzzards. But here was proof they'd not only survived, but been rescued by the very people everyone assumed had murdered them. The chief's breathing was growing shallower with each passing second. His dark eyes, clouded with pain but still sharp with intelligence, met Jake's with an expression of desperate hope. In that moment, Jake realized he wasn't looking at a savage enemy. He was looking at a dying grandfather who had probably saved more white lives than most white men ever would. Jake unscrewed the cap from his water barrel and knelt beside the chief. "Easy now," he said, supporting the old man's head as he pressed the wooden cup to his cracked lips. "Drink slow." The chief drank like a man who hadn't seen water in days, which, Jake realized, was probably exactly the case. Cup after cup disappeared, each one bringing a little more color back to the old man's face, a little more strength to his voice. By the time Jake's water supply was reduced to barely a single gallon, Chief Takota was able to sit up against the barrel. "You are kind," the chief said, his English careful but clear. "Kinder than my own people deserve, after what some have done to yours." "What happened to you?" Jake asked, settling back on his heels. "You're a long way from Apache territory." The chief's expression darkened. "I was betrayed. By my own war chief, a man named Geronimo who believes the only good white man is a dead white man. When I spoke of peace, of finding ways for our peoples to share this land, he called me weak. A traitor to Apache blood." Jake felt a chill despite the blazing heat. Geronimo's name was spoken in whispers across the territory, always followed by stories of unimaginable brutality. If this old chief had run afoul of the most feared Apache warrior alive, then his chances of surviving another day were slim to none. 3 days ago, Takota continued, Geronimo's warriors came to my camp. They said I was no longer fit to lead, that my friendship with white families like the Hendersons made me an enemy of our people. They stripped me of my weapons, my horse, my water, and left me here to die like a dog. "But you're a chief," Jake protested. Don't you have warriors loyal to you? Takota's smile was sad, but not bitter. I do. Many warriors who believe, as I do, that this war between our peoples will destroy us all if it continues. But they think I am dead. Geronimo made sure of that. The old chief struggled to his feet, steadying himself against the water barrel. In the distance, Jake could see dust clouds rising from the horizon, riders approaching fast. Many riders. They come to make sure, Takota said grimly. Geronimo does not trust even the desert to kill his enemies properly. Jake's throat went dry as he counted the dust plumes. At least 20 horsemen, maybe more, all riding hard toward his little way station. And here he was, caught red-handed giving aid and comfort to a man Geronimo wanted dead. How long do we have? Jake asked, checking his rifle and finding only 6 bullets left. Minutes, Takota replied. But there is something you should know about those warriors riding toward us. Not all of them served Geronimo willingly. Before Jake could ask what he meant, the sound of war cries echoed across the desert, growing closer with each passing second. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to test every assumption Jake had ever made about enemies and allies, about survival and sacrifice, about what it meant to do the right thing when the right thing might get you killed. Because sometimes the simplest act of human kindness could spark the kind of conflict that reshapes history itself. The war party crested the ridge like a vision from hell. 20 Apache warriors painted for battle, their war cries splitting the desert air like thunder. But as they drew closer, Jake noticed something that defied everything he thought he knew about Apache raids. The warriors in the lead were riding hard, but their weapons remained sheathed. Behind them, however, came 5 riders whose war paint was different, whose posture spoke of predators closing in for a kill. Chief Takota saw them too, and his weathered face split into something that might have been a smile if the circumstances had been different. My warriors, he said quietly. They have been searching for me. Then why do they look like they're about to scalp us both? Jake demanded, raising his rifle. Because 5 of Geronimo's men ride with them, Takota explained. Men who were supposed to make sure I died alone in the desert. My warriors don't know yet whether I live or die, whether they're here for rescue or revenge. The riders thundered into Jake's small camp in a cloud of dust and barely controlled violence. The lead warrior, a man of perhaps 30 with scars that spoke of many battles, leaped from his horse and rushed toward the chief. But before he could reach Takota, one of Geronimo's men, a savage-looking Apache with teeth filed to points, raised his rifle and aimed it directly at the old chief's heart. Takota dies today, the warrior snarled in English, clearly wanting Jake to understand. And the white man who helped him dies with him. Geronimo's orders. That's when Jake Morrison, a broken-down cowboy who'd never asked for a fight in his life, made the decision that would change everything. He stepped directly between the rifle and Chief Takota, his own weapon trained on the man with filed teeth. I don't think so, Jake said, his voice steady despite the fact that he was outnumbered 20-1. The chief is under my protection now. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 Apache warriors stared at a single white cowboy who had just declared himself willing to die for their fallen leader. Some looked shocked, others impressed, but all of them recognized courage when they saw it. The lead warrior, who Jake realized must be Takota's son based on their similar features, spoke rapidly in Apache to his father. The old chief responded in the same language, and Jake caught enough Spanish mixed in to understand they were talking about water, about kindness, about honor. But Geronimo's men weren't interested in conversation. The one with filed teeth kept his rifle trained on Jake's chest, while his 4 companions spread out in a classic kill formation. They'd come here with orders, and they intended to carry them out regardless of what Takota's own warriors wanted. You die now, white man, filed teeth said, his finger tightening on the trigger. For helping enemy of Geronimo. Jake felt time slowed down the way it does in the moment before lightning strikes. He was about to die for giving water to a thirsty old man, killed by men who saw kindness as weakness and mercy as betrayal. But before he could fire his own weapon, something impossible happened. Chief Takota began to sing. It was the same haunting melody Jake had heard when he first found the dying chief, but now it was stronger, clearer, filled with power that seemed to rise from the earth itself. One by one, Takota's warriors joined the song, their voices creating a harmony that made the very air shimmer with ancient magic. But it was what the song did to Geronimo's men that truly shocked Jake. The warrior with filed teeth began to lower his rifle, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like shame. The other four stopped their flanking maneuver, standing frozen as the melody washed over them. The death song of Chief Red Cloud. One of them whispered in accented English. But Takota has no right. He is not war chief. He is more than war chief, Takota's son interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority. He is keeper of the old ways, the ones our grandfather taught us before the white man's wars made us forget who we were. Jake watched in amazement as the entire dynamic of the confrontation shifted. The song wasn't just music. It was a reminder of something deeper than tribal politics or racial hatred. It was calling these warriors back to principles that transcended their immediate loyalties. When the song ended, Chief Takota struggled to his feet and walked slowly toward the warrior with filed teeth. The man's rifle was now pointing at the ground, and his face showed the internal war raging in his soul. "Broken Wolf," Takota said gently, "your grandfather and mine were brothers. We played together as children, before the soldiers came, before the reservation, before fear turned us into enemies of our own blood. Do you remember?" Broken Wolf's filed teeth were no longer visible. His mouth hung open as childhood memories visibly warred with years of Geronimo's teachings. "I remember," he whispered. "But Geronimo says." "Geronimo says many things," Takota interrupted. "But what does your heart say? What does the spirit of your grandfather whisper when you close your eyes and remember who you were before anger consumed you?" Jake watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about him or even about Chief Takota. This was about the soul of the Apache people, torn between those who wanted endless war and those who dreamed of a future where their children might grow up in peace. But before Broken Wolf could answer, a new sound reached them across the desert. More riders, approaching fast from the opposite direction. And the war cries they heard this time carried a different tone entirely. The sound of men who had come not to question or debate, but to kill everything that moved. Geronimo himself was coming. And when the most feared Apache warrior in the territory arrived to find his orders disobeyed and his enemies still breathing, there would be no more talking, no more singing, no more appeals to childhood memories. There would only be blood. The dust cloud rising from the eastern horizon was massive, at least 50 riders, maybe more, all moving with the disciplined precision of men who had spent years perfecting the art of war. At their head rode a figure that needed no introduction. Even from a distance, Geronimo's presence commanded the landscape like a force of nature. "He brings the entire war council," Chief Takota observed, his voice steady despite the approaching doom. "This is no longer about an old chief's disobedience. This is about the future of our people." Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized the full scope of what his simple act of kindness had unleashed. By giving water to a dying chief, he had accidentally triggered what might become the largest Apache gathering in decades. And he was standing at the center of it with 6 bullets and a half-empty water barrel. But it was Takota's son, who had introduced himself as War Eagle, who spoke the words that chilled Jake's blood. "Father, if Geronimo takes you alive, he will make your death last days. And if he finds you protected by a white man." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Then we fight," Jake said simply, checking his ammunition one final time. "All of us, together." The transformation that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. In the space of heartbeats, Takota's 15 warriors formed a defensive perimeter around their chief and the cowboy who had shown him mercy. Even more surprisingly, 3 of Geronimo's 5 men, including Broken Wolf, took positions alongside them, their childhood loyalties finally outweighing their fear of their war chief. Only 2 of Geronimo's warriors remained unmoved by the unfolding drama. They backed away from the group, clearly intending to report everything they had witnessed to their approaching leader. But before they could mount their horses, War Eagle made a gesture that spoke louder than words. He handed Jake his own rifle, a magnificent Winchester that had clearly seen many battles, and took a position directly beside the white cowboy who had saved his father's life. "Today we discover," War Eagle said in perfect English, "whether the old Apache values of honor and hospitality are stronger than one man's thirst for endless war." Geronimo's war party reached the crest of the ridge and paused, their leader no doubt assessing the scene below. Jake could see him clearly now, a compact, powerfully built man whose very stillness seemed to radiate contained violence. This was the warrior who had turned the entire American Southwest into a battlefield, who had made his name synonymous with terror across 3 territories. But it was what happened next that defied every expectation Jake had about how this confrontation would unfold. Instead of charging down the ridge in a thunderous assault, Geronimo dismounted and began walking toward them alone, his hands empty, but his presence filling the entire desert. "Dakota," Geronimo called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I come to speak with a dead man. How is it that you still draw breath?" Chief Dakota stepped forward, leaving the protective circle of warriors. Despite his age and recent ordeal, he moved with the dignity of a man who had never bowed to anyone. "I breathe because a white cowboy chose mercy over fear, kindness over safety. Perhaps you should ask yourself why such a choice surprises you." Geronimo stopped 20 feet away, his black eyes moving from Dakota to Jake and back again. "This white man has interfered in Apache justice. The penalty for such interference is death." "Whose justice?" Dakota replied. "The justice of our grandfathers, who taught us that hospitality to strangers was sacred. Or your justice, which sees enemies everywhere and friends nowhere." Jake felt the weight of history pressing down on the small patch of desert where they stood. 2 visions of Apache identity were about to clash, and somehow a broke cowboy with good intentions had become the catalyst for a conflict that would determine the future of an entire people. But before Geronimo could respond to his old rival's challenge, something extraordinary happened. From the ridge where the war chief's warriors waited, a single rider broke away and came galloping down toward them. As the figure drew closer, Jake realized it was a woman, and not just any woman, but one whose presence made even Geronimo step back in surprise. She was ancient, her hair white as winter snow, her face marked by decades of wisdom and sorrow. But she rode like a warrior half her age, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through the birth of legends. "My sons," she said, looking directly at both Dakota and Geronimo. "I am tired of burying grandchildren because you cannot remember how to be brothers." Jake stared at the old woman, understanding finally why her appearance had shocked everyone present. This was Cochise's widow, the mother of the Apache Nation, a woman whose word carried more weight than any war chief or peace negotiator. And she had just called both men her sons. "Grandmother," Geronimo said, his voice showing respect for the first time since he'd arrived. "This does not concern." "Silence," she cut him off. "For 3 years I have watched you lead our people toward extinction, convincing them that death with honor is better than life with compromise. And I have watched you," she turned to Dakota, "preach peace while our children starve on reservations designed to break their spirits." The old woman dismounted with surprising agility and walked directly to where Jake stood, still clutching War Eagle's rifle. She studied him for a long moment, her ancient eyes seeming to look straight through to his soul. "You," she said finally. "You gave water to a dying stranger." "What?" Jake felt the weight of 2 nations watching him, waiting for his answer. "Because he was thirsty, ma'am. Same reason I'd water a horse or tend a wounded animal. Seemed like the human thing to do." The old woman smiled for the first time since her arrival. "The human thing to do," she repeated. "When did we make this so complicated?" She turned back to address both chiefs, her voice carrying across the desert like thunder. "This white cowboy has done something neither of you has accomplished in 3 years of fighting. He has reminded us that our humanity matters more than our anger. What happened next would be talked about around Apache fires for generations to come." Cochise's widow walked to Jake's water barrel, the same barrel that had saved Chief Dakota's life, and carefully poured water into her cupped hands. Then she approached Geronimo and held out her hands in offering. "Drink," she commanded. "And remember that the water of life flows the same in all people, regardless of the color of their skin or the hatred in their hearts." Geronimo stared at the water in the old woman's hands, his face cycling through emotions Jake couldn't begin to interpret. Around them, 70 Apache warriors waited in absolute silence for their war chief's decision. The choice he made in the next few seconds would determine whether this desert became a battlefield or something else entirely. Finally, slowly, Geronimo lowered his head and drank from the grandmother's hands. The sun was setting behind the western mountains when the impossible gathering finally began to disperse. What had started as a confrontation destined to end in blood had transformed into something unprecedented. A council of war chiefs, peace negotiators, and tribal elders that resulted in decisions no one could have imagined that morning. Geronimo had agreed to meet with government negotiators, not to surrender, but to explore whether a lasting peace was possible. Chief Takota would serve as intermediary, his reputation for fairness accepted even by his former enemies. And perhaps most remarkably, Jake Morrison had been formally adopted into the Apache Nation as a brother to both War Eagle and, after a long private conversation, even to Geronimo himself. But it was the ceremony that followed that would haunt Jake for the rest of his life. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, every Apache warrior present, all 70 of them, dismounted and knelt in the dust around Jake's small way station. "They honor you," Chief Takota explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because you are white or Apache, but because you chose to see a dying stranger as a human being worthy of compassion. In our tradition, such a choice makes you a chief among men, regardless of the blood in your veins." Jake stood in the center of that circle of kneeling warriors, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had grown from his simple decision to share water with a thirsty old man. Tomorrow, these same warriors would ride in different directions, some toward reservation lands, others toward continued resistance, still others toward an uncertain future shaped by negotiations that might or might not succeed. But tonight, they were united by something more powerful than politics or racial identity. They were united by recognition of the fundamental truth that Jake's actions had reminded them all. In the end, their shared humanity mattered more than their inherited hatreds. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Cochise's widow approached Jake one final time. In her hands, she carried a gift that took his breath away, a war lance decorated with eagle feathers and turquoise, its shaft worn smooth by generations of Apache hands. "This belonged to my husband," she said simply. "It has never been carried by anyone not born Apache. Until now." Jake accepted the lance with hands that trembled slightly, understanding that he was receiving more than just a weapon. He was being given a responsibility, a role in shaping whatever came next between their peoples. "What happens now?" he asked. The old woman smiled, her ancient face transformed by hope Jake hadn't seen there before. "Now we discover whether the courage you showed today was a single act of kindness, or the beginning of a new way of seeing each other." As the Apache riders disappeared into the darkness, heading in all 4 directions to spread word of what had happened at Jake Morrison's way station, the cowboy who had started the day with nothing but a horse, 6 bullets, and 2 gallons of water found himself holding something far more valuable. He held the hope that enemies could become brothers, that fear could be conquered by compassion, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a man could do was simply treat a stranger like a human being. The next morning, Jake woke to find his water barrel had been refilled during the night, along with supplies enough to last him a month. And carved into the wooden post beside his door were Apache symbols that War Eagle later translated for him. "Here lives a man who chose love over fear." Sometimes the greatest battles weren't won with guns or armies, but with something far simpler and infinitely more powerful: the courage to extend kindness to those the world had taught you to hate. Because in the end, that was how peace really began, one cup of water at a time.